Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evidence Individualized Assessment Tool training. So today we're going to take you through the implementation as well as some usage tips on this new product feature that's been recently launched. So let's talk a little bit about why we did what we did with these individualized assessments. So Evident released a product feature called Individualized Assessments. This is meant to handle your pre-adverse and adverse action communications directly in the Evident product. When can you start using this? You can actually start using it today, but as of July 1st this year, all of the pre-adverse and adverse actions will flow through the Evident product with total control given over to you, the client. Where are you able to find this? You'll be able to find this within the Evident product under the Review of Candidates tab. We'll also talk about how to find the configuration as we work through the training here today. And lastly, why? Why did we decide to make this change? Because of the ever-evolving regulations at the federal, state, and local levels, this was a necessary change from the Evident team in order to give that control back over to you as the client. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to run through first the configuration, then the usage of the product itself. Once we're done with that, you can then add any questions you'd like to have answered here at the end. We will open up a Q&A session. The training itself should take roughly 25 minutes. You are welcome to add your questions throughout. We will be working through those questions during the video and answering them at the end. So without further ado, we will get the video started and you can ask any questions here at the end. Thanks for joining today. Companies that will be using this, you likely are going to have more than one criminal history policy set up. And we can now send this to the pre-adverse. What you'll notice here from the home screen is that we're going to need to get into our criminal history policies in order to enable this functionality. So first things we're going to do, we're going to click on Administration, and we're going to go down and click on Criminal History Policy. Now, for a lot of the companies that will be using this, you likely are going to have more than one criminal history policy set up. And one thing that's very important here as we walk through this is that if you want this functionality on all of your policies, you will need to enable this individually on each policy that you have. Now, in the training today, I'm going to walk through how to set this up on one individual criminal policy, but this same practice will be used in all of the policies that you set. So what we're going to do first here is we're going to find the policy that I want to enable it on. And for this one, we're going to look at the Pro Background Check with IA enabled. I named it that to make sure I knew what was in it and how to find it. So in order to get this set up, the first thing we're going to do is hit Edit. And what you're going to notice is some basic policy information within this page. So the name of the policy itself, criminal monitoring if it's enabled or not, waiting for identity verification. But most importantly, what we're focused on today is adverse action. And what this is going to allow us to do is set up that configuration piece for this individualized assessment. So you'll notice here by default it's turned on. We're just going to go ahead and click that toggle switch to turn this to yes. And as we do that, more options populate down below. So the first thing we're going to look at is the delay to send this adverse action. And what we're talking about here is when an applicant runs through a background check and an offense is flagged based on the policy, we're going to send out, or the product is going to send out, an initial pre-adverse email to the candidate. This time frame is basically going to designate how long they have to respond before we move them into adverse action. And so as we're looking at this, right now it's set at 10 days. So email goes out, and then 10 days from that email going out from the pre-adverse, they're going to need to respond to you with some sort of explanation around the charges. If they do not respond, they are then moved into a adverse action state, and we communicate out to them that adverse action. Now, this number can be moved up or down. It really is dependent on your company's policies or how long you want to give candidates to give an explanation for the charges that were found. In order to change that, we can either highlight the number and update the days, or we can use the up-down arrows to change it to our desired time frame. The next piece of this is going to be the email notifications on an IA review. So basically what we're saying here is that anytime a candidate has offenses flagged and moves into an individualized assessment, we want to ensure that our team is getting notified of that. So as I turn this toggle switch on, you'll see that I've got my email address already populated into here. I've actually added it ahead of time. But maybe there's additional folks who want to know. Folks from other teams, folks from your team, whatever it may be, you can come in and add as many of these email addresses in as you want, and then anytime a candidate goes into that pre-adverse action, you will be notified of that directly in your inbox. So now that we've talked about the communications going internally, let's talk about the communications that are going to go out to the applicant themselves. So this first one that we're going to look at is the text for the pre-adverse action notifications. And this is really a three-step process for these pre-adverse notifications. First and foremost is going to be setting up your subject line. By default, we're going to have an update on your application in there, but you are welcome to change that to whatever you would like it to say. In the body of the email itself is going to be some language around what we're providing them and what we're looking to do, and also how they can dispute those charges if they would like. Now, again, this is default language that we've put in. In a lot of cases, you're going to have a legal team or an outside counsel who may want to review that language and give you updated language to use within the communications that go out to those particular candidates. So if that is the case, if you are going to update that text, this is all a free form field. You can either copy and paste or free write it in here, depending on how you want to update it. Now, as we look down a little bit lower, the third step here is what actually gets attached to these communications as they go out to the candidates. Now, by default, we're going to include a PDF copy of their background check results, which is basically going to bring in the flagged offenses so they can see that. We're also always going to send a summary of their rights under the FCRA. This is an attachment that cannot be removed or edited. This is the legal document that needs to be included in these communications. In the event that you need additional documents to be attached to the communications that are sent, you've got that ability to do so here by either dragging in a file or clicking to browse. One really important aspect of this attachment piece is that this is a global attachment. So if you decide to add something here, it goes out to each and every candidate who goes into that pre-adverse action within this new individualized assessment product. So keep that part in mind. The other part of this is that you will have an ability to send specific attachments in pre-adverse to candidates as well. So if they're in a state that requires different documentation or something along those lines, you'll have that ability to attach it as you send out those communications. So that was the pre-adverse communication. The next is the adverse notification language. With this, very similar to what we just looked at in the pre-adverse, you can update your subject line. You can also update the text within the body of the email. And again, use your counsel to get that language accurate. By default, we are going to include that summary of their rights on the adverse action as well. And then you'll have an ability also to add in any additional global attachments that you would like to have on the adverse action notifications. So now that we've got this all set and we've gone through our configuration, at least to enable this part of the product, our next step is going to be moving into the macros so we can get those enabled. So I'm going to save this to get out of here. And then what you're going to notice is that we've got macros configuration over here on the left-hand side. We're going to go ahead and click on that. The macros are going to give you an ability now to create some customized language to use for each of the different scenarios that you may have as you communicate out to your candidates. So as we looked at the last piece under the actual configuration under the policy, we have that legal language there, which is not typically very personalized and doesn't necessarily get to the point of what we're communicating. These macros will allow you to give that more custom feel or that more personalized feel to your communications. By default, we've got two separate ones set up, or I shouldn't say by default. We have set up two macros already to account for two different scenarios within the product. The first one is based on adverse action. So this is IA reasoning adverse action. And basically what it's saying here is that your criminal profile could impede your ability to perform the job. Please send information regarding your case or contact us to continue to pursue this opportunity. Now with this is going to go out anytime they've gotten to the adverse action. So at that point, they are technically complete in terms of the product itself. You're also going to have an ability to ask for more information. So this next one here is part of the pre-adverse. And what we're saying here is that based on the results, we're going to require more information. And so you can see that we've got that 10-day period built into this communication to basically let them know that, hey, if you don't get to us in 10 days, you're no longer an applicant or a candidate for our company. So again, these are fully customizable, and these are two that we created as examples. You can create really as many as you want by clicking the Create Macro button and then giving it a title. The title is never seen by the candidate. That is purely internal, so you know which ones you're looking at. The individualized assessment email reason, that's going to be the actual content that will be inserted into the email and sent out to the candidate. So keep that in mind as you configure these macros, how they're set up and what's viewable and what's not to the candidate. So now that we've got macros created and we're really ready to get in and start reviewing our candidate, but before we actually go and review the candidates, let's take a look at what these communications will look like in the candidate's inbox. So first thing we're going to see here is the pre-adverse email that gets sent out. And where that macro gets added is right here underneath the company's initial assessment. So depending on which macro you use, will change the verbiage in this section right here. Now, if this candidate does move to an adverse action, what they'll receive at that point is this email, and it will include all of their attachments, the background check report, the Fair Credit Reporting Act documentation, and then we also added in an additional attachment here, the ukulele chord chart, to show how you can get additional attachments added and sent out to the candidate. So as they get their communications, this is what they will expect to see in their inboxes. So now that we've taken a look at that, let's get back over and start to review those candidates over here in Trust and Safety. Charges that were flagged. Canceled means that we've never gotten a response from them. So we sent out our pre-adverse and they never responded back to us. And in those examples, we do move them into a canceled state to let you know that we never got any sort of communication back from that candidate. Now, as we continue to look through all of the different candidates that are in here, one other part that we want to take a look at, and this is going to be the more important part, is going to be looking at just the pending review. These are going to be the new ones that have just come in that we want to make sure we're getting attention on. And as you can see, we currently have 3 in pending review, and we'll go through each one of these now and talk about how to get them moved through the process, as well as the information found within the candidate page as we click on each one. Now that we're reviewing the candidates, we're going to step through each one of these and move them through the process in different scenarios. For the first one, we're going to go ahead and click on the candidate. And within this screen, we're going to see some details about the candidate and their offenses that were flagged. So first and foremost, what you're going to notice on the left-hand side are details of that specific candidate. First and last name, a middle name if it's provided, email address, date of birth, the masked social security number, an address if it's been provided. We're also going to see the request creation date, the request submission date, and then lastly the background check report. Now for the request creation and the request submission, what we're documenting here is when the actual background check was sent, and then with the submission date, we're saying when the actual background check was filled out by the candidate and submitted back to the evidence system. As we look over to the right, we're going to notice that we've got the offenses that were flagged. Now, as we look at these offenses to review, one thing to keep in mind is that these are only offenses that we have grabbed in the criminal history policy. So you flag these as your charges that you want to come up anytime we run a background check. There's also going to be an opportunity to see any other offenses that were not flagged but did come up on the background check. And those can be seen over here in the upper right under offenses not flagged for review. And if we click on that, we get a little pop-up box to show us any additional offenses that were grabbed during that background check. And we can see here we've got an identity theft that was dismissed over 2 years ago. Down below that, we're also going to see the standard required forms. These are going to be attached to the pre-adverse email. If you remember from the beginning of the video, what we were looking at was setting up those global required forms that we're going to send out on every single communication. This section allows you to send one-off PDFs or attachments on those communications. And then lastly, down below, what we're going to see is our IA reasons. So these are the macros that we created. We'll need to select what we're looking to do as we process through our candidates. And with this particular one, we're in a pre-adverse, so we're actually looking to get more information from them. So we pick our more information required, and we can see now that we've got our additional text in here asking them to get back to us in less than 10 days. Now, in order to send this out to this candidate, we're first going to need to select the offenses we want them to review. We'll then want to add any additional attachments that potentially need to be added to this particular communication. And then we'll pick our IA reason. Once we're ready for that, we now have everything we need to send this candidate to the adverse action. With that, we'll come up here and we'll hit send to pre-AA. And now what you're going to see is the status of this candidate changed to pre-AA sent. And as this continues to populate, we'll get some additional information about the request being sent. And as you can see now, we've documented what we sent, but we've also added an additional piece down here to say that the pre-adverse was sent on 4/25, and it also is going to let you know who reviewed it. So in this example, I was the one who reviewed it. Now, as we continue to look at any additional actions that may have happened on this, we can go in and we can click on the audit log, and we can now see all of the different actions that were taken and by who. So there's never a question of who did what in the system. You can always go look at the audit log and find out who processed which parts. Now with this one, we're going to say that the candidate got back to us, gave us a viable explanation for the offenses that were flagged, and we've decided that we want to bring them on board, and we're going to go ahead and transition them to clear. Now, what we'll need to do in this scenario is nothing additional needs to happen within the candidate profile. We just need to click transition to clear in the upper right, and as we do that, again, it will populate, and now it will show us in that cleared status. When we go back into the dashboard, we'll also notice that this candidate shows a cleared status. With the pre-adverse action sent, we're going to get a status update up at the top here to give us some additional details. Firstly, what it's going to tell us is that the adverse action date is set to 5/5/2022. And that's based on the time frame that we set up in the configuration. And if you remember, we had set this to a 10-day time frame. So now that we've put them into that pre-adverse action, that 10-day timer starts, and this is going to indicate to us how much time we've got left. Now, in this example, really what we need to do is either wait for the candidate to respond or for that 10-day timer to come up. Now, in the event that we want to pause the adverse action, we want to give them some additional time to provide details about this particular offense or these offenses. Then we've got an ability to come up to the top here and pause this pre-adverse action. When we pause the pre-adverse action, what you're going to notice is a new timer that pops up. And this is going to let us know now the date that we paused the adverse action and how many days we've got left until this candidate moves into a canceled state. Now for this one, we've paused it out, we got our 10-day timer, we've also got the 45-day timer. The difference between the two is that the 10-day timer is configurable within the product itself. The 45-day timer is by default in the evidence system. If you decide that you pause a candidate and 10 days go by, and after those 10 days, you unpause that candidate, at that point, if you don't transition them to clear, they will then have surpassed the 10-day time limit, and the adverse action communication will be sent out to that candidate immediately. So keep that in mind anytime you pause one of your candidates, that if you do surpass your 10-day or whatever time frame you've configured, that the adverse action is going to be sent as soon as the adverse action has been unpaused. Back at the dashboard, we'll notice that we've still got 2 candidates that need to be moved through the review process. So we'll click on our next candidate here, and again we'll follow a lot of the same things that we did with the first candidate. So again, we can review any details we'd like, we can see the charges that were flagged in that background check, any required forms, and the IA reasons. For this example, we're going to go ahead, we're going to click them into, click into the offenses to select those. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and say we need more information still, and we're going to send them to pre-adverse. In our last example, we're going to move this candidate into the adverse action. So as we click on the last candidate for pending review, we'll follow our same steps. We'll flag our offenses, we'll add any additional forms, and we'll give it that last bit of IA reasoning. At that point, we can now send this to the pre-adverse, where the applicant will be notified of the adverse action. With this example, we're going to pretend that they never got back to us. That 10-day timer ran out, and so at that point we are going to send them the adverse action. In order to see that, we're going to have to wait for our 10-day timer to go away. And once that 10-day timer has expired, the adverse action then is sent. In order to review that, we're going to go back to our review of our candidates. We're going to search back out our particular candidate that's in that status. And we can see now that we've got a new status of complete AA sent. And when we click on that, we'll notice that again the status shows complete AA sent. And then down on the left-hand side, we've continued to document all the different actions. The date the pre-adverse action was sent, and the date the adverse action was sent. Now keep in mind, because this is a demo account, that timer is shortened quite a bit. With that in mind, we automatically push them to adverse action based on the time frame that we've configured. With this candidate, there are no additional steps that need to be taken. We have told them that they entered the adverse action, and we have moved on to the next candidates now. We want to thank you for joining our product feature demo today, and we look forward to you using the new Individualized Assessment product. If you have any questions, please post them into the chat here in the webinar. Otherwise, please reach out to your contact at Evident for any further information about using this piece of the software. Thank you and have a good day. All right, thank you everybody for watching the video. We do want to give some time now to answer any questions that you may have about what you just watched. So please feel free to post those in and we will answer them as we move through here. So it does look like we've got one question in. Will the offenses that have been cleared be moved to the other offenses or the non-policy violation section? So yes, they will. We are working on a fix of a minor bug where the offenses which were set to review but not adjudicated to be policy violations actually show up on the screen as policy violations as a part of the automatic transition from pending review to pre-AA. So the quick fix here is just if you refresh your screen after sending your pre-adverse communications, you will only see the policy violations. So the next question we actually have is, when is an item sent to post-adverse action? So when an item is sent to the pre-adverse action email, it's put into the pre-AA state or the pre-adverse state. It has 10 days by default, but can be configured on the criminal policy. Before that item is sent, a post-adverse action email and put into the AA completed state. So if the item is paused within these 10 days, then unpaused after the 10 days has elapsed, then that item automatically transitions into adverse action and with a completed status. If the item is paused within the 10 days and unpaused within the 10 days, that item remains in the pre-AA state and does not move to the adverse action until the 10 days has expired. All right, let's see what else we've got here. So another question we had, what are all the different configurations you can make in the criminal history policy? So with this one, there's actually quite a few different items that you can customize here as you move through it. So the timer between the pre-adverse and the adverse email, which we were just talking about in the last question, the email notifications for when an item enters IA review. So if you remember here, this is where we have that ability to add in additional email addresses to the actual communications sent out to your internal team whenever a new item comes up in the IA review. We can also customize the pre-adverse action subject line, pre-adverse action email body, pre-adverse action attachments. From that, we can also do customized adverse action subject lines, adverse action email bodies, and the adverse action attachments. Okay, let's see what our next question is here. Looks like we've got another one. Will all of the state, local, I'll rephrase that. Will all of the state, local notices, other than the personalized notices we need to complete on our end, will they be automatically attached to every pre-adverse action? So the answer to that is that the only attachment that is attached to the pre-AA email by default is the FCRA PDF. You will need to add any additional state legal notices yourself, either through the criminal history policy configuration or during the actual IA review process. So one other item to note on there as well is that as we talk about what goes by default, you're going to notice that there's a checkbox for a copy of the background check to be sent. That's the other option you see as you create or as you configure, that pre-adverse communication. So just keep that in mind. It's not on by default, but there is a button there to turn it on. All right. It looks like that is all the questions that we have for today. So we will wrap up our training call for today. If you do have any questions moving forward, please feel free to reach out to your contact at Evident. Otherwise, support@evidentid.com. You can send any questions over about the new individualized assessment product. We do want to thank you guys for your time today. And as I mentioned, please reach out with any additional questions. But please do have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining.